I thought so. This is a study in Richard Bauckham's book, Jesus and the Eyewitness Accounts. Now, I agree with most of what Bauckham's saying. I don't agree with all of it, but I agree with his general thesis. But what I just want to do now is I want to play devil's advocate, and I want to play the role of someone coming and taking on Bauckham and critiquing him. And one of the areas that we can critique him now is when he's trying to prove his point that we should take the Gospels as serious eyewitness material, because the living voice of investigating eyewitnesses that ancient Greek historians did is the same as, say, Papias, which shows a uniformity of looking at eyewitness material from the Greeks right through to the writing of the Gospels up to Papias. I noticed a problem with that, in that if we look at Papias, he's not consistent completely about who wrote the Gospels. He talks about Matthew wrote Matthew and Mark wrote Mark, but John the Elder wrote John, which general tradition has it that the Apostle John wrote it. So a historian who's trying to get eyewitness material has got its facts wrong. So we need to think about that just for a second. So we're going to think about the Gospel of John. Although there are several earlier documents both within the Orthodox stream and within Gnosticism that allude to the false Gospel or quote it, see the discussion below. The first writer to quote unambiguously from the fourth Gospel and to ascribe the work of John is Theophilus of Antioch, AD 181. Before this date, however, several writers, including Tatian, a student of Justin Martyr, Claudius Apollinarius, Bishop of Heracles, Athenagoras, unambiguously quotes from the fourth Gospel as from an authoritative source. This pushes us back to Polycarp and Papias, information about whom derives primarily from Irenaeus, end of the 2nd century, and Eusebius, the historian of the early church, 4th century. Polycarp was martyred in 156 at the age of 86. There is no reason, therefore, to deny the truth of the claim that he associated with the apostles in Asia, John, Andrew, and Philip, and was entrusted with the oversight of the church in Smyrna by those who were eyewitnesses and ministers of the Lord. Irenaeus knew Polycarp personally, but it's Polycarp who mediates to us the most important information about the fourth Gospel. Writing to Florinus, Irenaeus recalls, I remember the events of those days most clearly than those who have happened recently, for what we learn as children grows up with the soul and becomes united to it. So I can speak even of the place in which the blessed Polycarp sat and disputed how he came in and went out, the character of his life, the appearance of his body, the discourse which he made to the people, how he reported his converse with John and with the others who had seen the Lord, how he remembered their words, and what were the things concerning the Lord which he had heard from them, including his miracles and teachings, and how Polycarp had received them from the eyewitnesses of the word of the Lord, reported all things in agreement with the Scriptures. Most scholars recognize that this John, certainly in reference to John the Apostle, the son of Zebedee, is, for Irenaeus is concerned, none other than John, whom he emphatically insists is the fourth evangelist. For Irenaeus, that the Gospel should be fourfold in the sense already described was as natural as there should have been four winds. As for the four Gospels, he wrote, John, the disciple of the Lord, who leaned back on his breast, published the Gospel while he was resident at Ephesus in Asia. In other words, the name of the fourth evangelist is John, and is to be identified with the beloved disciple of John, 13:23. I've got it. I don't think Papias was actually wrong about talking about John the Elder. Okay, I think that Eusebius didn't like, and he states that clearly in the text when he's commentating about Papias. He didn't like the end time teaching, the millennial reign and all the rest of it that Papias was stating. And so therefore I think he's trying to muddy the waters, and he's trying to put an emphasis on Papias was actually confused and got his ideas from John the Elder and not John the Apostle. So I think that's why the confusion is there on that score. So in other words, Baukham's theory is intact. Yes, people can get things wrong. Historians can get things wrong. They can get facts wrong. But if they're trying to be honest, they do get us. If we get to that eyewitness material, it does give us access to something unique in that event. If we prove it's eyewitness material, then what that means is that we have to think about whether it's credible, whether it's consistent, whether there are other testimonies, whether the background verifies what they're saying. However, I think presuppositions do play a part, because if someone came to me and said, I've just investigated testimonies of people seeing UFOs in the 1950s, I wouldn't take any of that testimony seriously, because the probability of alien ships coming down to the UK, not to the UK, but to the Earth, the probability of that is not even 1 out of 100. It's not even. It's beyond impossible when we're talking about billions of galaxies and billions of stars in each galaxy, and we can't see life anywhere. It's just an impossibility. So if someone starts saying to me there are UFOs and eyewitness sightings, and before I even look at the evidence, to me it's just not a possibility. I will look at the evidence, I will try and be fair, but at the back of my mind I'm thinking it just seems improbable to me. And so presuppositions play a role. It's reasonable to consider these persons' testimonies in the Gospels because of the God of the Gospels, the God who created everything. If he created everything, it's not unreasonable that he could bring someone from the dead. And that as a presupposition means that when you're looking at the evidence, you're going to be more predisposed to look at it favourably if it seems to be consistent. So I think that no matter how fair and honest you are as a historian, whether you're an atheist or a skeptic or agnostic, If you don't believe there is a God, then no matter how much testimony you investigate, you're never really going to come to faith and to believe in Jesus as dying riser. There has to be a point where the presupposition that God exists is part of your historical inquiry. Because at the end of the day, if you don't believe there's a God, even if you got all the dots tilted and you say, well, Jesus, it was seen by these disciples, etc., and you've got that, then that still leaves you there. It doesn't move you into a belief that there is a God, or that God rose Jesus from the dead. I mean, you can put causes, effects and causes in the equation. How come the gospel, Jesus' resurrection, changed the Apostle Paul? How come the enemies of Jesus didn't provide the body to put out the Christian faith? You can provide all these cause and effects, and it gives you a strong probability that Christ rose from the dead. But ultimately, if you don't believe there's a God, you won't grant that evidence as being significant to the proving of Jesus' ministry. You would just say, well, if he said he was going to die and he rise again, and he died and he rose again, it was just coincidence. It doesn't necessarily prove that it was a supernatural event. But what Baukham's project does do is it puts it more on the table that these things did happen, that the disciples did see these miracles, they did see Jesus rise from the dead. But what we make of it as moderns, as skeptics, I mean, I'm not a skeptic, but if you are a skeptic, then that's a different matter. But it means that we're getting closer to the historical event. So I think what it means is, when we're defending the resurrection of Christ or the life of Christ, that we have to challenge the skeptic not only on the objective historical information, and when I say objective, that means that we do come at it with a bias. So we have to challenge people's bias and ask them why they are coming to the material in a fair, objective way. So we challenge their methodology, we challenge them on their understanding of the facts and the interpretation of the historical Jesus. But also, we have to challenge presuppositions. We have to go into an argument of, does God exist or not, before we even get to the historical evidence, I think. That's my reflection so far on Bauckham. It's a very powerful tool. It backs up the Christian faith, strengthens the Christian faith. But I'm just qualifying it as to how we can, basically how you use all this in a practical form quickly. Is basically, you say to people, I believe Jesus rose from the dead. And they say, well, that's just your opinion. And you can say, well, I can provide you evidence, eyewitness material. And you provide the fact that you go into all the historical reasons why the Gospels are eyewitness material from ancient historians and the way they wrote. Then they might say, well, they might have got it wrong. And you say, well, the evidence is against that, because there's so much eyewitness material here to offset any possibility of that. But then they'll say, well, yeah, but even if they saw a resurrected Jesus, still doesn't mean we have to believe it, doesn't prove it. And then you can say, well, do you believe there's a God? And say no, and you give some arguments for that, and you say, well, this God created us in his image, and he rose, and it says that he was going to raise Christ, and he's risen Christ. And if you believe the interpretation of this God and the scriptures, then that's one way of looking at it, that Christ did rise from the dead. And it explains X, Y, Z, it explains the evidence, it explains the reason why you're here, etc.